You know how sometimes you'll see a weird lucky streak or a strange coincidence and you think, there's got to be a reason for that. Well, our brains are literally wired to find those cause and effect connections. But here's the thing. Sometimes they see meaning in what is actually just random noise. Today, we're going to dive into a super powerful cognitive bias that makes all of us jump to conclusions, and the consequences can be, well, pretty surprising.
All right, let's start with a real-life medical mystery. This one really stumped researchers for a while, and it's the perfect way to see how our intuition can lead us way, way off track.
Okay, so picture this. Researchers do this massive study on kidney cancer, looking at over 3,000 counties across the United States, and they find a really clear pattern. The counties with the lowest cancer rates all shared a few specific traits. So, what's your first guess? What do you think those traits were? Maybe something about lifestyle or the environment, right?
So, the answer is pretty interesting. The counties with the lowest rates, they were mostly rural, didn't have a lot of people, and were in traditionally Republican states. And it's so easy to build a story around that, isn't it? You think, the clean country air, fresh food, no stress. Makes sense. But, and this is a huge but, when the researchers looked at the counties with the absolute highest cancer rates, they found the exact same thing.
So wait a minute, how is that possible? How can the rural lifestyle explain both the absolute best and the absolute worst outcomes? Well, the simple answer is, it can't. The story we just came up with, the one that felt so right, it has to be wrong. So what is really going on here?
The solution to this puzzle has nothing to do with diet or politics or pollution. Nope, it's all about a fundamental rule of statistics that our brains, frankly, are just not very good at grasping intuitively. So here's the key. The most important thing about these counties wasn't their lifestyle. It was their size. They're sparsely populated. They have small sample sizes. See, a small population doesn't prevent cancer, and it doesn't cause it either. It just creates more statistical noise, more flukes. Let me make this super clear with a quick analogy. Imagine we have a giant jar with a perfect 50-50 mix of red and white marbles. Jack's job is to pull out a small sample of just 4 marbles. Jill's job is to pull out a slightly larger sample of 7. The goal for both of them is to get an extreme result, a sample that's either all red or all white. Who do you think has a better chance?
The results are kinda nuts. Jack, with his tiny sample of 4, is a whopping 8 times more likely to get an extreme result than Jill is with her larger sample. It's just because small samples are way more volatile. They are much, much more likely to give you these wild, unrepresentative results, both really high and really low, than larger samples are.
Now, we all kind of get the first statement, right? Large samples are more precise than small samples. That just feels true. But here's the thing. Until that second statement feels just as obvious, just as intuitive, we haven't really gotten it. Those rural counties with the crazy cancer rates, they're just like Jack's small handful of marbles. They're way more likely to produce extreme results, both surprisingly good and shockingly bad, just by pure random chance.
So this mental glitch we have, this powerful urge to believe that a tiny, random sample must be telling us some deep, meaningful story, well, it has a name.
It's called the law of small numbers, and it's basically our mistaken belief that the patterns we spot in a small bit of data have to reflect the bigger picture. We just expect a small slice of the world to look and act exactly like the whole pie, and that's just not how it works.
The psychologists who came up with this term, Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, described it with a bit of a joke. They said our gut instinct seems to follow this law of small numbers, which is their funny way of saying we wrongly assumed that the rules for huge samples also applied to tiny ones. It's a statistical fantasy our brain falls for every time.
So why on earth do we do this? Well, it's because our brains are storytellers, not statisticians. We are desperate to find causes for things. When we see an effect, like a really high cancer rate, we immediately search for a cause. We want a simple, neat story, and we will almost always choose the certainty of that story over the messy, uncomfortable idea of random chance. Our brain is basically a machine for jumping to conclusions.
Okay, so let's look at how this plays out in the real world, because this bias isn't just a fun little brain teaser. It pops up everywhere, from the sports we watch to multi-million-dollar policy decisions.
A classic example is the idea of the hot hand in basketball. You know this one. A player makes a couple of shots in a row, and suddenly everyone, the fans, the announcers, the player, is convinced they're hot, that they're magically more likely to make their next shot. It feels so real when you're watching it.
And that belief is incredibly powerful.
When researchers actually studied this and presented statistical proof that it's not real, the legendary Celtics coach Rhett Auerbach pretty much said, "Yeah, I don't care about your study." He trusted his own eyes more than the data. That's how strong the illusion is.
But the data doesn't lie. When you analyze thousands and thousands of shots, it turns out a player's chance of making their next basket has absolutely nothing to do with whether they made the last one. Streaks happen, sure, but they're just the kinds of clusters you'd expect to see in any random sequence. The hot hand is one of the all-time great cognitive illusions.
Okay, so we get basketball streaks wrong, big deal, right? Well, this exact same mental error can lead to absolutely enormous and very expensive mistakes out in the real world.
Take this case from the early 2000s. The Gates Foundation, along with other big organizations, poured hundreds of millions of dollars into a big initiative to create smaller schools. And their logic seemed totally solid. They looked at the data to find the most successful schools in the country. And what did they find? They found that among the absolute top-performing schools, small schools were overrepresented by a factor of 4. And it's so easy to create that causal story, right? Oh, smaller schools mean more personal attention for students, better relationships with teachers. It just makes perfect sense. But by now, you know exactly what's coming, don't you? You know the crucial question you have to ask. If you're only looking at one extreme, the very best, you are missing half the picture. So, what about the other extreme? What did the worst performing schools look like?
And there it is. The worst performing schools also tended to be smaller than average. It was the exact same statistical trap as the cancer study. Small schools weren't better and they weren't worse. Their small size just made their results more extreme in both directions. They are simply more variable.
So what's the bottom line here? What should you take away from all this? First, just burn this into your brain. Small samples give you more extreme results, both good and bad. Second, remember that your mind is a story-making machine that sees causes everywhere, even in random data. That means you have to be super suspicious whenever you see a huge conclusion based on a tiny bit of data. And finally, and this can be a tough one to swallow, we have to accept that a lot of things in the world happen just because of chance, not for some deep, specific reason.
And that's what I want to leave you with. Think about it. In your own life, your job, your hobbies, maybe even your relationships. Where might you be seeing a meaningful pattern and neat cause and effect story that could really just be an illusion created by the law of small numbers?